very warm welcome to our panelists, to Nadia, to Shairoze, and to Ken, and we may be joined by a couple of others as we go through the morning. We are here to talk about questions of ethnicity and race in both Irish sport, but also going slightly beyond Irish sport as well, in terms of whether sport can actually play a part in what we can do as a society to overcome the issues that have come very much front and center stage over the last 2 weeks and 3 days since George Floyd's murder in the United States. But this is an issue which which touches at a deeper level within our lives. This is not just a news bulletin. This is not just catching it on CNN at the end of the day. This is something that we live with to varying degrees every day of our lives. And that's what we want to get to today, because sport has played a part in the debate, a significant part. And just before we go into the discussion, I just want to share a couple of thoughts and images as to how things have actually been, and we will see an image there of Jesse Owens. This goes all the way back to 1936, when Jesse Owens was one of 2 athletes of color on the US track team. When he traveled over to Berlin, they were staying in hotels that were of a better standard than he was used to back at home, where it was still very much a question of difference. And there is a great book by Donald McRae from back at the start of this millennium about the story of Jesse Owens and Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, and the impact which they had in terms of being able to move the debate along. The debate did move along, but very little changed. We had throughout the 1960s, Rosa Parks, we had so much angst, so much anger, so much conflict around the questions of race. I was fortunate. I was in Washington DC last year, and the only statue which sits in the Houses of Congress, which wasn't put forward by one of the states have an opportunity to put forward 2 statues, and the only statue which didn't got put forward by its own state of Alabama was that of Rosa Parks, which the congressional authorities decided to put forward as well. So that makes up the 101 statues that are there. So the 1960s was a time of great strife, and in many ways it came to be illustrated for the rest of the world, for the outside world, by the actions of Tommy Smith and John Carlos on the podium in Mexico, where they raised their fists in support of the argument that we should be treated as humans, that this is not a question of race, that this is a question of energy and effort in the sporting field and of just basic humanity in the wider society out there. What they did certainly caught the attention of the world, and things carried on as well. But 40 years on, Colin Kaepernick still had to make a protest which became an incredibly iconic moment. It was at the time that Donald Trump was coming in to become president. It was at a time when racial tensions in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, where he was playing, and across the United States was still very strong. And he took the decision to take a knee during the playing of the national anthem before one of the NFL games. He was subsequently de-rostered, delisted from his club, and was very badly treated within the sport of American football. There is some move now towards rehabilitating him, but that may be just the NFL acting in corporate reaction to what is very much a mass movement. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but it's not all about the United States. We have had players who don't have red hair and freckles that have played and represented Ireland on many occasions. Paul McGrath, Phil Babb, all of whom have experienced some degree of racism. But in general terms, once you get to the top of your profession, in Ireland, we love a bandwagon. We love to jump on a bandwagon. So Paul McGrath would consistently come out as one of the most respected and loved Irish sportsmen of all time. We're delighted. We have Shairoze, who is joining us here for the discussion now in a moment or two, with the proud owner of an All-Ireland Championship for Mayo, which is unusual in itself, dare I say, as a Dublin supporter. But Shairoze won at under 21 level back a couple of years back, and Shairoze will be able to share his experiences with us now. And we have a surge of young athletes coming through. We're delighted that Nadia is here to join us, but we also had running in the European Championships. We had Patience, we had Rashida, we had Gina, and we had Molly Scott. There was one thing that struck me about the photograph is that each of Gina and Rashida and Patience had the Irish tricolour on their cheeks, and Molly didn't. And in a world of symbolism, perhaps there is something that that we were doing as Irish people that meant that they felt that that was important for them to doubly express the fact that they are proud Irish citizens and wearing the Irish vest as well. So we're here to talk about questions of ethnicity. A warm welcome to Nadia, European medalist, 815-meter runner, the blue ribboned events on the track. A very warm welcome to you. To Shairoze, who we've seen there in action as well, who has not only made it on the field, but is doing well in business as well in terms of sports equipment, GRG. Good branding there on the t-shirt as well. Both Shairoze and Nadia, both graduates of or soon to be graduates of DCU in Dublin, and finally from Ken McCue, who many will know as a loud and proud advocate of equality. And as you said to me when we were talking earlier in the week, Ken, a question of this not being about the white race or the black race or the Chinese race, that it's a question about the human race. If I could just come to you first, Nadia, you came out in support of Gina's statements last week and probably achieved a significant level of national media attention and media coverage for what you were saying. Can you share with us a little bit about what it's been like for you as an athlete growing up, and the experience that you've had both from the Irish public and the Irish sporting community?
I think in terms of sport, I haven't really experienced racism to my face, I guess. So I want to, I guess, first be clear about that. And then as well, looking back at last week, I didn't really expect to get, like, speaking out to get so much media coverage. And then I know part of me maybe felt even a little bit guilty about my face being plastered all over the conversation a little bit, because, you know, I haven't experienced much racism in sport. But kind of what the thing I did say coming out was that my mom has told me not to look at comments under kind of like articles with me in them in my Irish gear, just because, you know, we've all seen the comments under about different Irish athletes. So I suppose we're almost expecting that. But for me in sport, it's been great. I played GAA for a long time when I was younger as well. And I guess I was probably a little bit more self-conscious while playing GAA, just because I definitely look different to most people playing, and I never really played against anyone else with a skin colour like me. But luckily nothing really in sport, but definitely in day-to-day life there has been instances.
Okay. And Shairoze, for you, coming up to DCU, but having grown up in Mayo and achieved great things, playing football over there as well. What's your experience been like of growing up as somebody who looks different to to the average guy walking down the street in Castlebar or Ballantubber?
Yeah, so when we first moved over to Ballaghaderreen, there wouldn't have been a huge population of non-Irish nationals in Ballaghaderreen. It was a small rural town, so my family would have been one of the first to get here, and at the start would have had a few experiences of racism, just walking down the street with your friends or family. You'd have people say stuff, but I suppose the longer we've been here, people have gotten used to us and they've got to know us, and they realise, okay, we're just like anyone else. We're a normal human being. We go about our day-to-day business like they do. and they're more open-minded now. So Ballaghaderreen has actually been really good since, I suppose, the start of it, really opening and welcoming community. So like we've got the refugee centre here as well, and the GA club helps out with that, and just welcoming anyone really. And then on the GA pitch at the start, I suppose, I had a few incidences when I was younger, just getting started and playing. You'd have a few people say a few comments. You try and, I suppose, pass a blind eye into it, but to kind of stick out now that all the media attention is being brought to racism, and you're getting all the spotlight on it. So you're kind of thinking back and thinking, oh wait, actually it did happen. Even in shops and stuff when you're working, people might turn around and ask you, where are you from? And you'll go, well, I'm from Ballaghaderreen. And they'll be like, no, where are you actually from? Like I was born in Pakistan, so I'd be like, okay, I'm born in Pakistan, but then I have cousins that are actually born and bred here, and they'd be asking them questions, and you'd be like, well, I'm actually born here, so I am actually from here. And people mightn't think that's racist, but it can come across, I suppose, racist.
Yeah, well, it's very much like, you know, it's how you receive it, but there is no question that it is. And I think, you know, there is a, you know, a fact in Ireland that there is a much greater level and a greater degree of kind of latent racism, which doesn't make it any less damaging. Ken, if I can turn to you, you've lived this for any number of years, and part of the challenge for Shairoze and Nadia is that when you're young and when you're competing and when you're an athlete, you actually see things only as yourself. That's just a question of age. You and I are a little bit older, and maybe you sort of see that bigger picture, that it happens. It keeps on happening from generation to generation. How can we stop that? How can we stop Shairoze being asked, you know, where he's really from? And how can we stop Nadia being stopped in the street and getting a second glance or a second look, or having idiots making comments in forums about it? What can we do?
Well, I must compliment Nadia for quoting Angela Davis when she said it's all very fine being non-racist. You really have to be anti-racist. I think that's really important that people look at it from that point of view. But also my hero in the photograph with the Black Glove protest is actually Peter Norman. Peter Norman was an Australian athlete who was second in that race, and he has a badge on his tracksuit, and it says Olympic Project for Human Rights. You know, Peter Norman, when he got back to Australia, was completely blanked, and he never represented Australia again. In fact, he wasn't even invited to the Sydney Olympics. You know, so white people like myself and yourself, Rob, have a big role to play in you know, fighting against racism and making sure that people don't ask that question, where are you from, or where are you really from? You know, we get this all the time. You know, it's obvious that I'm from the northwest inner city with my accent, but when I've got white skin, so people don't normally stop me in the street, but they do when they talk to me. They ask me where I'm from, where are you really from. But it is a huge problem, and we have to overcome it, you know. And so in sport, Nadia was saying that she wasn't maybe didn't receive abuse in sport, but the organisation Sport Against Racism uses sport as a medium to combat racism in society, and I think that's really important. It's not per se about racism in sport; it's outside of that.
Okay, the importance of education. My wife was looking at something on Instagram the other day, and she pointed it out to me, and it was a video of a father showing a child, a picture not dissimilar to what we've got here at the moment, and they were pictures from 4 different races of family. And he was asking the kid to point out things. And at no point did the kid make reference to the fact as to whether a family was, you know, of one particular color. He said, oh, look, they're smiling. Oh, look, they're, you know, hugging each other. Oh, look. It just didn't come into the conversation that they were any different. They were just people who were going about their lives. At what point does that translate into us seeing people as being different by virtue of the color of their skin?
Well, first of all, those 4 kids were not members of 4 different races. They were 4 different ethnicities, There's only one single race, that's the human race. Otherwise, we'd be calling it human races, you know. So that's important to get that across, that we're all part of the human race. It's learned, you know. Young kids are not born racist. They pick up terminology from their parents mainly, and from their environment where they live. And so if it's learned, it can be also unlearned, and that's what SARI is about. You know, we're in for the long haul. It's education is absolutely vital, and we'll have to look at our skills. How many teachers from diverse ethnic groups now are actually at the blackboard, or the whiteboard, I should say? Almost non-existent. We have only one single Muslim teacher with hijabi that is a volunteer for SARI. Like that's got to change. Also, the curriculum has got to change. You know, where's human rights appear in the curriculum? Where does the UNESCO Charter appear in the curriculum? Nowhere. So you know, we've got to work on that. The Department of Education has a big role to play. At the moment, everything is handled by the Department of Justice. Where's sport where's the Department of Sport, for example? It's got to change. And the likes of the Gaelic Athletic Association now, we have Jeremy McTavish as the Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and I'm working with Jara and SARI and GAA and our partners, and you know, we're traveling around the country, and we're at grassroots. GAA is probably best positioned because they're in every parish on the island, so they're probably best positioned to work this. But SARI then has a program called Football versus Discrimination, where we cover all forms of discrimination, because racism has first cousins like sectarianism, sexism, homophobia. So we cover this in the schools, in the primary schools. But unfortunately, the Department of Justice have cut all the funding for our program, so we have to rely on UEFA Foundation for Children going forward. So it's a very difficult area for us, and people have to realise that education is the key.
Okay, I think that is something that we really should come back to as well, because you know, these things don't just happen by accident. They can come from the grassroots, but they need to be funded. If I can come back to you, Nadia, you mentioned at the start that you were kind of surprised and felt a little bit guilty about being out there as to making you know, statements on this, and yet it can only change when you do step forward and make it known, because otherwise, let's say there's 5% of the population that would think it okay to pass a comment on you as you walk past or run past, and there's 95% of people that wouldn't. But we have to be aware of the 5%, and we have to stop the 5%. And I think I'm being wildly optimistic in putting it at that. But that sense of you as more than a runner, more than a student, more than Nadia, that you can be actually a role model and stepping forward for this. It's sometimes going to be an uncomfortable position, but do you accept the challenge almost to actually step forward? You're here today, so clearly yes.
Yeah.
Have you thought about it?
I do, and I guess what I've seen is that as an athlete, my voice can be more powerful than I maybe thought it would be. So it would be silly not to use it on something I'm passionate about. Definitely, like it is nerve-wracking speaking about it, because you know, I don't want to say something wrong either. It's not just white people that can say the wrong thing. You know what I mean? But no, it is worth speaking about. And kind of as you said, there might be 5% who think that, you know, they can pass a comment at me, and the other 95% might not think that's appropriate. But I think the point I really wanted to get across over the last few days was that 95% needs to not just stay silent. They actually need to tackle that other 5% or so that are willing to say something. I think in Ireland we're just told stay silent, don't contribute, and then that means you're not racist. I think we're seeing that's not enough, and you know, we need people to stand up for racism. And you know, I include myself in that as well. I think of times in school when you know, kind of silly comments or jokes have been made in front of me, and I obviously didn't agree about them, and they weren't about me, but I just stayed silent and was annoyed secretly. But looking forward, I want to say something and stand up when it is uncomfortable. But I think, we all need to be willing to do that. And the more of us that do it, the more change we'll see.
Okay, as I say, I think it is. It's very brave. Shairoze, as we said, you've created your own business as well as performing on the football field. Have you noticed a difference in the way that you're treated there when you're going in to to talk with potential suppliers and people like that? Like, is it comfortable being different in Ireland to in the way that we deal with you when you cross the threshold?
Like Ireland, if you compare Ireland to America, it's not as racist or as violent or as obvious as what's going on in America. But you'd be foolish to think that there's no racism in Ireland. But dealing with people, most of our business is done around Mayo. We're based in Mayo, and the two other guys involved with me are from Mayo. So people in Mayo have been good to me and good to the two others. But I think that could be the fact that I've gone on to play underage and under 21 with Mayo, and I've played at the highest level. So people actually go to appreciate what you've done. But I'd say if I was just a normal person that set up a business, would people be as forthcoming to help or to take us on as a supplier for them? I'm not too sure. It's kind of based on what you've achieved as a person that kind of changes their mind. So like Nadia, if she wasn't representing Ireland in running, would people be as open to her with the comments rather than saying them on a forum? Would they say them directly to her? It's just a question I'm not too sure about.
Yeah. And Ken, you mentioned there about education, about it being so important. We've seen over the last couple of days there's been incidents in schools that have come to prominence, and and young people stepping forward and making their claim on it. But it's not only in schools, is it? Like, how can we educate in the home? How can we educate grandparents? We've heard so much about grandparents and missing their grandchildren and going for the hugs and things like that. They're a different generation, and there are thoughts and feelings that would run through them that would possibly be the kind of people that would ask Shairoze where he was from, really. How can we educate those? Can we teach them? Because they're the ones that will be teaching the grandchildren, and it's through home and through our society that it's being passed, as well as through schools.
Yeah, this is really important. The family situation, older, like grandparents. I remember my grandfather banned some of the proverbs and the sayings that people would use, like that would have the N word included. So I was very lucky in that sense. But you often hear, in the street, for example, older people using terms like half caste, interracial. I heard a woman the other day describing herself as a member of the Irish race. And so we really need to dump all that lexicon. I think that's totally unscientific. As I said earlier on, there's one single race. I think it's really important for the grandparents and parents and guardians of youngsters to use the proper language, the scientific language, and that casual and unconscious bias as well will have to be dealt with. So yeah, you're right. The education is not just in schools; it's in youth clubs, it's in various aspects of life, particularly in the home. It's really important. It has to come from there.
Okay. You mentioned language there, and Shairoze, you mentioned Irish nationals. That whole question of Irish nationals and non-nationals. My guess is that's wrong, inherently wrong. Is that the case? To you, Ken, really?
Just on the term. I used to ring up the complaints department in RTE every week to complain about their use of the term non-nationals. There are very few. There's only a very small percentage of non-nationals in the country. Most people are nationals of one country or another, whether they're in direct provision or as refugees. So, you know, that's really important as well, that people pick up on the language. I was probably the only one complaining, but they did remove the term. They did remove the term non-national. They don't use it anymore. And most non-nationals we have here are protected by UN mandate anyway. But it's another word that has to be done from the lexicon.
Okay. I just want to highlight, we're going to the last 15, 20 minutes, we're going to go over to an open question and answer session. I see there's a couple of questions already coming in. There's a button down at the bottom of your page there that you can go to. I'm just going to go into the room, and I hope you don't mind, but we've been joined by Max Mauro, who is a known associate of Ken's, and who wrote the book on the Balotelli generation in Italy. And I just wonder if I might be so bold as to invite Max to join us on the panel here. I can do these things automatically. And my apologies for not having fully teed this up with you beforehand, Max. But if you can hear us, how you're looking at this from an outside perspective? You're based over in Southampton. How are we doing in Ireland as regards our own attitudes towards race? Maybe that might not work out quite so well.
Let me see. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you now. Sorry, my apologies.
Let me see. Maybe. Oh, you can see me as well.
Yeah.
Hear and see. Double benefit.
That's a t-shirt.
My t-shirt. Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you. I was listening and paying attention to what everyone was saying. It was really interesting. So to answer your question, I think that Ireland has been doing quite well over the last few years, and I think the work that Sari has done, at least to educate, to pass on the message, has worked quite well. It's a matter not only of the institutions, the government, is a matter of the media, as Ken rightly highlighted, the way particularly sport commentary and the narration of sport portrays people who are originally from a different country, or they have a different heritage. And this is not an issue only of Ireland, obviously, it's an issue also of Italy and every country, I would say, in Euro-Western countries who have experienced the flows of immigration over the last 20, 30 years. But diversity has always been a characteristic of this country. It's a matter of how we deal with these characteristics of this diversity. So sport is a very important tool. Obviously, as we have some cases in Ireland, when I was researching for the book that I published last year, I learned about more cases. You mentioned the runners. They did so well at the European Championship, these girls, and there are other instances where people particularly took social media and making racist comments. But what I noticed in those cases is that there were more people trying to make a point that society is diverse, and this is a natural phenomenon, okay? And racism is not accepting this diversity, which is a natural phenomenon in every society. So I think all this debate, even this occasion today, it's important to send this message. And through sport and through education and through the use of the media, we can really improve things. In Ireland, as I said, Ireland has changed dramatically over the last 30 years, if you look at the statistics. And so I think it's going fairly well, although there are problems for young people practicing sport.
Okay, I was lucky enough last year. We were involved in a number of activities this time of the year, actually around Pride, and we worked with Bank of Ireland on a couple of initiatives where they were helping out in some rugby tournaments, and they decided to actually sort of ask Rory Best, who is, you know, of Ulster stock, you know, would be as far from the stereotypical, you know, gay man as you could find. And they thought it was very important to actually bring Rory in, and his conversation around diversity, around inclusion and everything that you've just said, Max, was perhaps the most telling out of the whole conversation, because he was able to reach out to a different audience, an audience who may just close their ears as soon as they see a different color face or a different, accent or a different way of coming on board. So I think we've touched on the fact of, our fellow athletes standing up beside and making a proud statement. Is it something, Nadia, that is part of a conversation that happens around athletics teams and things like that, that you do need to stand up for each other?
No, it's never really anything that's ever been brought up. I've always felt really accepted by my teammates, and I guess hopefully never received any racism from them. So not really, but I definitely have felt the support this week of other Irish athletes, and I really appreciate that. And it seems like they're all kind of happy to share the sport and to share the Irish team with me. So I think the most powerful way probably is just to show more diversity on the media. For me, I think that would be a big thing, like in terms of sport as well. Now, I know it's up to sports stars to, I shouldn't in turn, for the sake of diversity, get more coverage than I'm due if my athletics achievements aren't enough. So it's up to me to make sure my athletics achievements are up to scratch there as well. But I think diversity in the media and advertising, stuff like that, just to represent society a little bit more would really help.
Okay, and it's the case of stepping forward. David Gillick in athletics, great runner, no particular media experience, but he's become a media star now by virtue of being willing to put his hand up. Could we expect to see you, Shairoze, on the Sunday game live or anything like that coming up in months to come?
That's not for me to answer. Like Nadia said, though, like to myself, Nadia, all the other kind of athletes that are of colour or whatever, need to put up our hand and help out in whatever way we can. But individually, the difference we can make is going to be little to none. But I think there needs to be systems or organisations that need to kind of put something in place, and we kind of assist with it and help out with it to kind of get the message across, rather than us kind of pushing things ourselves, because individually you're not going to achieve a whole pile. Like the work done by Sari, even the GA and Athletics Ireland, if the associations kind of provide a platform that we could then use to kind of further push out the message, would be essential, I think. Okay.
Just before we go to the room, I just want to touch on one area which has come up consistently over the last couple of weeks since the questions of race have dominated our media landscape. Direct provision here in Ireland is an issue which creates a huge storm of feeling. A lot of it unhealthy, and a lot of it knowing that we need to do something better, but we're not in a position to do it at the moment. Is there a role for sport in helping to actually find a way through that? I know, Ken, that you've organised the Sari, the football tournaments and things like that. Is it something that sport can play a really active role in trying to get to a better place than we are at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm continuously saying to various ministers for justice that if they're going to introduce, say, direct provision centre into a town or a village or wherever around the country, that the first port of call should be the local GAA club. And it's worked in places like Ballaghaderreen and mostly, like around the country. But in the city, we need with the centres in the city, we need to do a lot more work in the likes of Ballseskin, which is a reception centre, where we need to start a sports programme there to get particularly the young people involved. And Sari's been very effective at this in visiting most of the direct provision centres around the country. But the system of direct provision is cruel anyway. It's a horrible system, and it should never have been introduced in the first place. It was only introduced as a temporary measure. So, Sari's always been calling on the closure of these centres.
Okay.
But it's not just justice. Justice might be okay for running prisons, but they're not very good at running direct provision centres. So.
Okay. the last point I want to make is a question of protest, and it's unfortunate, but it often needs to be the dramatic gesture that actually brings the debate forward. I was particularly struck and somewhat uncomfortable in a way that I didn't quite understand how, when I saw the Minneapolis police detectives kneeling, taking a knee as George Floyd's cortege went past. Given the background, I just thought that the imagery and the messaging around that was so mixed and confused, but at least it was making us all think and realize. And just before we go to the room, I have a short poll, and it comes back to Colin Kaepernick, that it's a question of whether we can look to what's happening in America and we can support it, or we can think that it's poor. But the question, and I'll put it out there to you now, so that you can see, and if anybody is visually impaired, I'll read it out as well, is a question as to whether you would support taking a knee during the Irish national anthem at the Aviva Stadium or Croke Park in order to protest against direct provision, for example. It has proved a very effective way, and it has got the broad general support of people in Ireland who would say that it was the right thing to do. But when it comes closer to home, I'm just wondering whether that is the case. So we've got about half of the votes in at the moment, and it's proving very dominant that we would support it. Not advocating it at this point, but if it comes to it, that there is clearly some quite high level of support there. I'm going to go to the room, please, if you've got any questions.
Rob, before you go, this question of protest, don't forget 10 years ago we marched in solidarity with the family of Toyosi Chitabi, who was one of the trainees with the Insaka Glentordan Academy. And at that time, we demanded proper hate crime legislation. In 10 years, it hasn't happened. It's still not there, and particularly hate speech, because with social media, that's where an awful lot of the racism is generated. So I think it's really important that people remember that something concrete has to come out of Black Lives Matter protests. That's not just ad hoc and just for a week or 2 weeks. That it's really something concrete and permanent has to come out of that. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. I'm just sort of sharing out the results of that now. 79% said yes, that they would support taking a knee. Only 7% against it, and 14% uncertain or unsure. We'll go to the room. If you have any questions, and Max, if you're able to stay with us, there may be some towards you. One from Teresa Lavina. You've asked the question, accents, often the target of racist attacks, and people with accents that have their opportunities restricted, both socially and in work environments. Looks stand out at first sight, but the moment you open your mouth and your accent is different, it makes you experience a whole new level of discrimination. That could be said against people from Kerry and Dublin, or people in Dublin, from Dublin and Galway as well. But it's a case of getting there. The question really, you have to educate through the screen until ethnic minorities are properly recognised on screen. That we won't be recognised in society. That picks up on what you were saying there, Nadia, as well, about. We've seen this in our support for advancing the cause of women in sport, is that you just have to make it normal. You have to make it normal to see that that you don't have to have the freckles and red hair to actually play football for Kerry. That you can look different and still be Irish and representing. Got one more question here, anonymous. How do your guests feel about the expression "new Irish" to describe people originally born outside of the country, or to parents born outside of the country who call Ireland home? We did touch on that about the new Irish. Is that just a softer way of saying non-Irish, Ken?
When I was working and studying in England, I never wanted to be called New English. It's And I didn't hang around with just an Irish group of people in the diaspora, or the expats as they're called. No, I think it's really important, and a lot of, particularly young people with mixed ethnicity, for example, a Zambian Irish child, will always, it's important that that heritage, that Zambian heritage, despite the fact that it may live in Ireland, Zambian heritage has to be nurtured and understood. And again, that's back to education. How do we never come across African writers in schools, for example, very rarely, and very important that that part of their heritage is promoted at all times. I think that's vital.
Okay. There was the report which has been covered in the media again 2 years on recently, which studied attitudes towards race across 12 European countries, in which we performed very badly. I think it was 51%, of those who were questioned were aware of an incident of racial violence in the last 5 years, versus only 21% in the UK, where we would think, Shairoze, you mentioned about the fact that we're not as bad as the United States in terms of the tension around race, but that research indicated that we're actually not in a great spot altogether. Is there a danger that by actually sort of raising it up now, that we give oxygen to people who would want to actually raise it, or have we moved beyond that? Max, if I could ask you, maybe in terms of your experience across Europe, is there a danger that that talking about race, and even Nadia and Shairoze coming out and talking about experiences and their own feelings on it, that you actually give rise to people to make the damaging comments and the and express their sort of hurtful feelings?
Well, it's an ongoing debate, particularly among people of color, because we have many cases of, particularly in football, particularly in the past, prominent black players saying it's better not to talk about that. It's better not to create a big fuss around, like it happens on the field, it happens. But I think change, and I think it's the moment for, particularly for the younger generations, what we call the second generations, to be open and to be vocal, because we know that it has been an ongoing issue for a number of years across Europe over the last, particularly the 30, 40 years. But it's the time that we cannot really remain silent. I think it's important that also at youth level, at amateur level, if something happens that is being talking about. In my research in Italy and in Ireland, I did like 2 researches that were quite the same, but I spent more time in Ireland, interestingly, because I lived there for 3 years. I learned that very often young people, they don't say that they're being abused because it happens. They accept like a normality, but we should not remain silent. I get your point, but I think it's important that we talk about this more.
I think it is the case. We even saw that, with the Me Too movement, that horrible area of, white male senior privilege would still exist to this day, had people not been willing to, to stand up and put themselves in the firing line, because it's not comfortable to actually say that you've been done wrong. And yet it is the only way that it's going to come up. Nadia, because you've done it, was there anything coming out of the comments from the supportive side, from your teammates, from your friends, from your colleagues, that struck you as being something that, God, I wish you'd said that. I wish you'd said that louder, or I wish you'd said that before? Or is there something that was being put back to you that you think would do better by actually having a wider audience for it?
I think it was, yeah, I received really good feedback, and you know, a lot of people were kind of commenting saying, "We're proud to see you on the screen, and we're proud to have you, and don't listen." And I really, really appreciated that. Like that was kind of that wasn't why I spoke out. It wasn't to get compliments, but I did really appreciate that. But I think, yeah, it goes back to those people are saying really nice comments, and they're obviously they have the kind of the desired outlook on this that we want. But are those same people who are willing to say that to me, are they going to then turn around to maybe their older parents and try and educate them? Are they going to educate a colleague? Are they going to make sure there's more diversity in their workplace? Are they going to help show more diversity on the media? Like, it's I really do appreciate the nice comments I received, but once again, I'm asking those people to make themselves uncomfortable and put themselves in the firing line, I guess, and call out people and call out racism going forward.
Okay, yeah, and it is the case that the fear of it being uncomfortable is often worse than actually being out there. And you're right, there was a risk that you took in terms of opening yourself up to, you know, to people shouting you down, but actually you realize that people are generally nicer. And
yeah, no,
you're right,
really are, yeah.
but it does, all of these things do depend on us. It's always easy to say, yes, there has to be a campaign to do this, and you know, I'll march once, but then, oh sure, I've got a match to go to, or dinner will be early, and so I won't go to the second march. You have to be consistent and persistent in terms of actually getting it right. Is there something that we can collectively do? Because in the same way as the question of women in sport isn't a question for women, it's actually a question for you know, for everybody to actually sort of, you know, stand up. So this is, you know, focusing on the human race rather than the Irish race, horrible phrase, or anything else. You know, what can we do now? Like, what can we do when this call ends, when we go out into the outside world? What's the one thing that everybody in the room, who I'm guessing are primarily supportive of, you know, of getting to a better place, but what's one thing that we might be able to do? I might just go around the four of you to ask that, and I'll kick off with you, Ken.
Well, first of all, the implementation of the national sports policy is really important. There's 57 varieties, 57 measures that are there, and a few of them are referred to ethnicity. And with the GAA, I'm working with the GAA and Maynooth College to Maynooth University to actually carry out an exercise with the GAA, which would look at ethnicity and the participation of people from our diverse ethnic background, our diverse ethnic community, who are involved in the GAA. As I said earlier on, it's in every parish on the island of Ireland. We want to establish how many of people from those backgrounds are involved in GAA clubs. I think it's really important, where the kids, for example, might be involved in school sports, GAA, but are they transferring into clubs? And that's where real integration takes place. And that's what SARI is about. SARI is about social inclusion and cultural integration. And that's the only way, it's the best way to combat racism.
Okay, Shairoze?
Like, you made a good point earlier about the New Irish, and Ken kind of mentioned, like, that's a term that shouldn't be used, but we should be looking at Ireland as a new Ireland. It shouldn't be the New Irish, it should be a new Ireland, because you're not going back 50, 100 years where it's just Irish people. It's like, it's a newer Ireland where everyone is kind of welcome and they have their own part to play, and everyone kind of feeds into the system. So you need everyone kind of standing up for other people. So let's say if it's me receiving it, it might be my friend group or some stranger that might be standing up for me. So if I witness it and somebody else is getting it, I need to then kind of stand up for them and let it know, okay, that's not okay to say. You can't be saying something like that, or you can't be doing something like that. I think everyone as an individual has a part to play and needs to step up and, I suppose, call somebody out, or kind of stand up for somebody and say, okay, you can't do that, or help somebody out in a situation that they might be isolated and be surrounded in, you know?
Okay, so when you're stepping out there alongside Tom Parsons and Aidan O'Shea from Mayo, and they're shouting at you from Hill 16, it's not you that needs to give out to them; it's Hill 16 that needs to police itself and stand up and and do the right thing. Max, one
Just
thing.
one little comment on this. I think that we will start to see through change when diversity moves from the pitch to the board and the newsrooms. What I mean by that is that we need to start to see more coaches and managers of different ethnic background, different origins. And more importantly, since sport these days is a media spectacle, is very much what media show us. It's important that people in the newsrooms are aware of this, are aware of what it means. And that can happen when we have more diversity in the newsrooms. I've been researching Italian media over the last couple of years, and I'm really appalled by the complete lack of diversity, which then translates into the lack of understanding of what it means to be, to grow up from being of a different background into a society where the majority of the people might look different than you. Yeah, okay. Does it make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I was born in Chiswick in West London, and my great grandfather was born in Massachusetts. So yeah, I'd probably qualify as a non-Irish national or a new Irish as well. But because the color of my skin is white, I don't get that same level of it. So, but we have to kind of inherently understand it, and we have to fight against it. Nadia, last word to you on it.
Yeah, I would kind of echo what Shairoze said, and just overall say, don't be silent if you're receiving racism. Don't be silent, share your experience. And then equally, if you're seeing it in front of you happening, don't be silent, call it out. And yeah, I think if everyone in Ireland took that attitude, we'd make a lot of progress. Okay,
well, hopefully we will. It could be that direct provision is the point of contact on which we actually begin to realize, what's right, what's wrong, and how we treat each other as human beings. I spoke to Ken earlier on, and just as part of a very small gesture that we can do, I've given a complimentary membership of Sport for Business to Sport Against Racism Ireland, not just for the sake of it, but we will focus areas like this in our small little world on the commercial side of sport, and we'll look at it in the context of our Sport for Social Good, which will be coming up later this summer as well, which we do in partnership with Allianz, and look at areas across the wider sporting community where we can do social good. It's been a really interesting discussion and a really important one as well, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. We will have a highlights package up on the website and part of our daily news digest tomorrow. But for the moment, a very big thanks to Ken McCue from Sport Against Racism Ireland, to Shairoze Akram from GRG Sports and Mayo Football, to Max Mauro for joining us as well. And copies of his book are available in all good bookstores now, The Balotelli Generation. And to Nadia, we're not quite sure yet when we're going to see you back on the track, but who knows? I'm sure you've been training hard all the way through, and maybe qualification for some event over in Tokyo next summer would be on your horizon as well. The very best of luck to all of you, and my thanks to everybody for joining us here today as well. This is Rob Hartnett for Sport for Business. Thank you very much.